Well, thank you all for coming, especially on a Sunday. My name is Pablo, and I've been focusing on HTML5 game development and app development over the last 4 or 5 years. And I teach online in my company, Zenba.com, which is about online courses on game and app and web development. I'm currently running a Kickstarter campaign, so apologize for the self-promotion. There's going to be a link on each slide. You can check it out if you want. So let's get started. Whenever there's any new technology, any new thing coming out, there's always people who will grab it and make games with it. That's happened with all programming languages, with all the stuff that's come out of computers. And of course, HTML5 is not the exception. So what exactly is HTML5? There are different definitions. The official definition is just that it's the latest specifications for the HTML language, which considers the usage of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, 3 languages used on the web, to create rich, interactive websites, applications, and of course now games too. So let me talk about a little bit about these three main blocks. HTML is the original standard language to create websites. So it's been around since 1993, officially released, and it's used to give the website a certain structure. Then we have CSS, which has to do with styling, with how this website is going to look like. So think of types of fonts, colors, alignment of elements, positioning of elements. So then we have the combination of those two allows us to create something that actually works and looks beautiful. And then the sort of magic element is JavaScript, originally developed and still used as a client-side scripting language to make websites more interactive. Think of form validation when you enter a certain thing and you get an error message that the name should have 10 characters or whatever. When you want to do that on the client side, on your web browser, JavaScript is used for that. But it's come a long way, and it's now used also as a fully server-side language as well, and also even some database allow interaction using JavaScript. So given the widespread of the web browser all over the place and the fragmentation of all the different platforms, because we have desktop, phones, smart TVs, different companies that have their own platforms, it was just a matter of time before people started to use these technologies, as also the hardware support got better, to create not just websites, but desktop applications, mobile apps, and of course games. So I'm going to talk now about some of the elements that allow the creation of games using these web technologies. One of the main ones is the canvas tag, which is an element in HTML5 that basically allows you to create a rectangle on a page. And that rectangle, you can basically draw anything in that rectangle. So it can be, you can draw 2-dimensional images, or you can have a 2-dimensional projection of a 3-dimensional image. So it's basically like the program Paint in Windows, that you can have anything in there. So that is obviously important for games. And the canvas comes with its own API, or way to work with it, with functions when you're coding in JavaScript, that allows you to update also what's being shown. So therefore, you can do animations. You can have things move around. And that's what, at the end, most games are just elements moving around and with interaction. All top-of-the-line phones nowadays, including iOS, since iOS 8, support the canvas accelerate the canvas on a hardware level. So they have a special support for this element, and they accelerate it using the hardware. So that includes the latest Android phones, Windows phones, of course, iPhones. The lagging ones that are important that don't necessarily have good support for this are the low-end Android phones. So low-end Android phones, which account for a big part of the pie, don't necessarily have good support for these technologies yet. And before we move on the presentation, I want to show you just some quick demos on the canvas. So there is going to be a little bit of coding in some of these. I'll show you the code quickly because I know some people want to see some code, but it's going to be very simple stuff. So Let me grab that link. Yeah, so throughout this presentation there will be a little bits of coding, because that's what we sort of promised in the event description. Let me just fix some resolution stuff. Yeah, so for example, this is a very simple example of something that you can do with the canvas, not even putting images, because you can obviously put images, but it's just to show you how you can basically work with this area that's a canvas, and you can make any kind of game. And this would be like a sort of old school Frogger game where you're just moving in one line, avoiding obstacles. And the code for something like this Yeah, I'm just going to open it in the code editor. Basically, what I want to show you is that inside of a HTML page, it's simple to put on one of these canvas elements and quickly have some rectangles moving and some sort of interaction going on. Worst game.
That's almost elevator right there, isn't it? The old classic with the little dudes right up in the elevators.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry that I'm taking so long with this. Yeah, I think I'll leave it for later because I'm having some issues here. Let's continue with the slides. Okay. Okay, we can have graphics, right? And we can have user interaction because that's just part of how websites work. You can listen to the user input and update what's happening in the graphics. And then the other important aspect, obviously, is sound. So HTML5 has two ways of playing sound in your games. One way is what's called the audio tag, that you can easily embed on a website, an audio tag, and play some sound. So you can also access this via JavaScript code. And then there's a more complex API as well called the Web Audio API, which allows you not just to play, say, an MP3 file or a sound file, but also to work with this, to do like sound effects, or to grab like just a piece of the whole song and play that part, to change volume, to do any sort of audio editing. So that's like a more advanced API that HTML5 has. And then another topic that I want to talk about is Webgl. So Webgl is not officially part of the HTML5 HTML specification. It's like a separate group that works on it, a separate specification, but it's supported in all major browsers and also the main mobile platforms as well since recently. With different degrees of support, so I don't think this technology is really production ready for games on the mobile, unless you're only targeting like the top of the line phone. But basically, Webgl is a way for you to work to render 2D or 3D images on a canvas element, the canvas that I just mentioned, but using the GPU, the graphic card of your computer. And it's all done using an API that's based on OpenGL. So it's something that people who work in 3D are already familiar with, and it also works now on the web. And there are some really cool demos. There are some frameworks that you can use to work with this, because working directly with this without any frameworks is pretty rough coding. It's like you're coding in a language that's similar to C, and that's how OpenGL works, and it's very complicated, but there are frameworks that make it very easy to say, render a cube on the screen and now put on a plane and the light goes here, let's put in a camera in this location, and then you can move in the camera. So it's a very sort of upcoming technology that's getting developed, and that eventually it'll work like seamlessly in all devices. So I'm going to show you some of these. I won't be able to show you the heavy ones, so it's going to use all of the data plan of Ashley's phone. I'll show you some local ones that I have.
My data is actually renewed today, so I go for it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so you can have like cubes and planes. This is like a little demo thing. I was trying to generate like a random city. I was really just having a play with the framework. And on their website, so there are some really, really nice examples. So the creator of this library is David Catu. He was a Microsoft evangelist. He also works on this library. And you can import assets from programs like Blender and 3D Max. So there are like some really, really impressive demos. But I think the other like not particularly light. Yeah, so you can do things like this on the browser, which is something really cool that most people are not aware of, that they can have something like this and make a game with this or an interactive experience. Even on a normal website, if like on a company website, you could have some part that is 3D to show, the product parts of some store. So that's one application, and obviously games. Now let's talk a little bit about distribution. So far, what we've talked about, you know now that you can in theory make games on the browser. But you're probably thinking, I want to sell these games on the App Store or distribute them alongside native applications, have them on the Play Store, and not just having to use a web browser all the time. So let me start by saying that for some of the platforms, sadly not the main ones, not the ones that have the most users, so Windows, Amazon, Firefox OS, Tizen, in those you can just publish the HTML5 game as like that. Or there's like an easy process to do it, usually just putting it on a zip file, uploading it, and you're done. Or in Windows, you have to create like a project for HTML5, and you can just put it in the HTML code, the JavaScript code, and publish it alongside the native apps. But for iOS and for Android, you can't do that. So there are these things called wrappers that basically you grab your HTML5 game and you wrap it around native code. And that native code is usually something called a web view, which is like a web browser, but without an address bar, without bookmarks, without anything. It's just like a frame where you're showing the game. So this, with this web views, you can just put your game in there, and then you have at the end something native that you're publishing on these stores. And the main, the most used library for this, it's called Cordova. Cordova allows you to do this very easily. So you install these command line tools, and then you also have to install the SDK that you want to target, like the one for iOS or the one for Android, all of them. And then you can build your game or your application for these native platforms. But not only that, Cordova also allows you to access via plugins a lot of phone features. And you can even code your own, so you can code your own Java code or your own Objective-C code and connect it to JavaScript via APIs. And then via JavaScript, you're accessing all this cool stuff. So some of the main plugins that Cordova has are, for example, accessing phone calls, sending SMS, accessing the geolocation of your phone, the camera, vibration API, calendar. And there are many other community-created plugins And you can obviously create your own. So if you're, say, an iOS developer, you can build your own plugin in Objective-C, and then you say there's like say Apple Watch or some other new thing coming out, and you can also access it via JavaScript on your HTML5 game or app. So that's something really cool. Now, there's usually the confusion between, like, people talk a lot about, you might have heard Phonegap. I don't know if any of you have heard Phonegap, that Phonegap is used for this. So I'm going to explain where there's Phonegap and Cordova, so I'm going to explain the difference. And the difference is not that it's written Cordova and pronounced Phonegap. It is that originally it was the startup that created this project called it Phonegap. And then this startup started having a lot of success with popularity with the product because people started using it. It was awesome, right? You can build it in HTML, and then you can just export it to iOS, to Android. And then what happened was that Adobe bought them, and Adobe also bought the trademark of Phonegap. So what happened afterwards was that the open source project was passed on to the Apache Foundation and called Cordova, which I think was the name of the street where they worked or something like that. And Adobe kept the brand Phonegap. So nowadays, you have Cordova, and then you also have Phonegap. And Phonegap is basically the open source project that's Cordova, plus some Adobe services in the cloud that Adobe offers. Adobe wants you to use their services in the cloud, so they basically grab the open source stuff and put that on top of that some of their own things. So that's the only difference now. You can anything that works in Cordova and works in Phonegap, but they've also said that maybe in the future that might change, but so far it's the same pretty much. And the process is usually you will build your game. If you're not using any of the phone features, you can just test it on your web browser. And then you can use these command line tools to export it and test it on your device, and then build it and publish it. If you're developing for iOS, you also need to generate certificates, and there's a bit more of, like, if any of you have worked on iOS, you know there's certificate provision files, some sort of like paperwork, like bureaucracy, in order to export it to a certain device or to the platform at the end. So with Phonegap Build, which is this main service by Adobe, you don't have to install any local SDKs. You just upload your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files to the cloud, and they'll send you back like a build file. So they do this process in the cloud. You can do one app for free. Other than that, you have to pay. But there's another option as well, which is free, which is the Intel XDK. And I'm going to show you how it works. It's a bit of a monster because it has everything that you need in one program. So for some people, it might be a bit might be a bit too much or scary, but you might have everything that you need in there. And it's just this program that combines code editor with like emulator on your computer, with the ability to just plug your phone on USB and get the app sent to your phone or via Wi-Fi. And then you can also do the cloud compiling thing, but for free. And even include like some external services like ads and some other like.
Does this work with Cordova, or is it?
It uses Cordova in the cloud. Yeah. And also, yeah, so you can also include Cordova plugins as well, like the phone, the contacts, and vibration, and some of the other ones. So let me open that, and I wonder if I can use this mouse because it would make things a bit easier. It's okay.
I've got a wireless mouse. If you want to
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. So yeah.
Hopefully it won't have any dramas.
Hopefully. So, yeah, it's logging in.
Does that one have command line tools?
No.
How many many games are in their store if it's you're publishing to the cloud? What do they have a large number of?
Well, I haven't spoken about frameworks yet, but there's the main framework that people are using now is Phaser, and they have a page where they list like people submit the games and they just put them on this list. I'm not sure exactly how many. Yeah. So, and I think the people from Intel, they also have they showcase some apps and some games that are using their tools. So this program basically combines a code editor that's open source called Brackets, which is used for web development to code in JavaScript as well. So they put that on one tab, and then you have also the emulation. And then you can emulate like a certain screen size of a certain device. So for instance, we have Google Nexus 4, but you can do an iPad and see what the games are going to look like on an iPad. You can obviously zoom out. So that's really cool, just having that whole thing right there. And you can emulate some other stuff like accelerometer and some other things. Then basically what they did was combine all this open source stuff and put it all like in different tabs, because these are all independent projects. Like this emulator is called the Ripple emulator. You can also get it as a Chrome extension. And then this thing uses their cloud service just to send it to the phone. You can check it on the phone right away with the QR code, or just then you can also debug your thing from the phone. You connect your phone with USB, and then you see like the errors that you're getting. You see it on the computer, so that makes it a lot easier. And then that's kind of similar, but for the memory like resources that it's using. And then in the last part is where you build it. So if you build it for Android, for iOS, it'll just upload the files to the cloud, do all the compiling, building thing over there, and then it'll send you back the file for you to open like on Android. It'll install it then. And then you can submit that to the store as well. So besides this, it has some other like cloud services.
Do they have any service for submitting it to the App Store for you?
I've used it for Android. I know you just get the APK file, but then you just upload that one directly. And I think for iOS they do, because before they didn't. You still had to do it on a Mac, but now you don't have to do it on a Mac. I think you just upload the certificates to their cloud, and they'll do it for you. Yeah, so that's a good tool that exists for this, and a way to publish them as well that uses Cordova. So most games have a lot of things in common. They have sprites on the screen, images that you want to move, you want to animate stuff, you want to have like work with like texture atlas or a file that has multiple images on it. And then you want to grab this image for that, sounds, user input, dealing with screen resolutions are common things. So some people have created, because everybody likes to save time, and instead of doing this over and over, some people have created frameworks that help you do all of this stuff so that you just focus on your game. Now that's like a ideal way of having it, right? That you just work on your game, but the truth is, because this is cutting edge stuff and not everything might work out of the box, you can't like really disconnect from what's going on behind the scenes. You do have to understand the framework, and you might even end up extending it as you work on some games. The most popular game framework at the moment is Phaser, which is an open source. It's free. It's got a large community at the moment. But before I talk about Phaser, I just want to mention two rules to have in mind when you're working with HTML5 game frameworks. So the first rule, I don't know, has any of you used jQuery for web development? How many of you have read the code of jQuery? Nobody. You have, awesome. Most people treat it as a black box and they don't read the code. I guess you should always read it even in those cases. But in particular, in HTML5 game frameworks, you have to read the code at least once of the framework, because it's just going to help you so much. All the stuff is not on Stack Overflow. This is all cutting edge. It's changing. You need to understand what's doing behind the scenes. And also the way the framework is implemented sometimes is similar to things you want to have on your game. So you'll like see how they checked for the collision or how they did this other thing. And then you might do something similar. So it's really important that you at least read it once. It's going to save you so much time. And like I haven't read jQuery, I haven't read Angular, and I guess yeah, probably the result would also be good. But at least in those cases, a lot of people ask the same things online, and you find the answers. But in here, you might not. Then the other thing to keep in mind is not to get carried away with the specific framework that you're using, because Phaser, say it used to be, this other one, then you're using Phaser, then maybe in a couple of years you're using some other framework. So don't forget that what you're really doing here is making games with JavaScript. So JavaScript is the main language you're using here. It's a language that you have to love if you want to use this stuff. Some people get like obsessed with one framework, and then they forget that it's like the better you get at JavaScript, the better you get at this as well. And frameworks may come and go, or may not, but what you're really doing is JavaScript game development, to be more precise. Now regarding Phaser, oops, I keep on pressing the wrong key in here. Regarding Phaser, how does Phaser render the images? Well, if the device you're using supports Webgl, it will use, you can set it as automatic, and then it will use Webgl if it's available. So that's the fastest way to do it, the best sort of performance. You can reach 60 frames per second in the main top-of-the-line phones. And if it's not present on the phone, if it doesn't support WebGL, it will default to Canvas. We'll use the Canvas API, which has less performance, but is available on more devices. So it takes care of that for you. All you do is you say, I want a sprite here. You don't start typing in the Canvas API or WebGL API. Just put it on the framework, and behind the scenes, it'll use the one that can use. And same thing with audio. So it will try to use the Web Audio API, because it's just better. It can do like many sounds at the same time, but it's not available everywhere. If it's not available, it will just use the audio API. Other things that this framework allows you to do, it's very easy to load all the assets at the beginning of the games, like when you get the loading screen where everything is loading, so that when you visit a website, that doesn't happen, right? You visit a website and then you see some images that appear like this. But in a game, that would be completely unacceptable. So they've implemented asset preloading, so that all the images are loaded first to the memory, and then the game is shown in one piece. Then, well, it allows to work with sprites. It gives you the concept of the game world, so you can query for the size of the world, or what happens when a sprite reaches the boundary. Will it bounce back? Will it get out of sight but still be alive, or will it be disappeared when gone when it's? So imagine like in like the old Mario games, like if you're moving on the level and something like disappeared from the screen, then it was like gone sometimes. Like it allows you to have control on that, to have a camera that follows you around, to have different stages of your game. They're called states, so you can have something that happens at the beginning, a loading screen, a welcome screen, then the game, menus, a game over screen. And yeah, obviously has built in some options to work with screen resolutions. So you can decide, okay, will my game, I'm going to develop my game, say, on like thinking of a square, but then if the screen is a rectangle, what is it going to do? Is it going to fit the square and have the other sides like empty, or is it going to like show as much as it can by filling it all the screen? It has those options. So you can specify how you want your game to respond to these different screen sizes. And they're actually adding even more support for that. So you could, like, supposedly the new version will even have like responsive stuff that you can say, in this case, show it like this or like that. And the framework has two physics engines. You can choose which one to use. There's a basic one called Arcade, where everything is squares and rectangles. And then there's a more sophisticated one where you can have like more complex shapes and obviously use more resources to do all the calculations.
Does it use like another open source physics system? Or is it all
there's also like a Box2D implementation, and so I think there's like the two that come with it, and I think there is Box2D, but I'm not sure if it's like a plugin or part. And then there was another one that was like in between that was like removed and left as a plugin. But in theory, you can just integrate any. You could integrate a different one if there's one for JavaScript that you want to use. I'm going to show you some Phaser demos. So they're not as impressive as this Babylon.js stuff. This is all two-dimensional. So some of the stuff I'm going to show you are games I've made for the courses or for some tutorials. So this, for instance, it's inspired, or a copy, sort of inspired in this Fisherman game for kids. So it's like a toddler's game where, yeah, you can't hear it, but there's like a sound if you click on the animals.
Horse.
Yeah. And this one I've chosen to make it responsive in this way. So it keeps the same aspect ratio, and the rest is black. Then you can obviously do things like this, which was made by an author in one of my courses. An author from the US made this game, and he explains how to build it. So this one is different how it responds to the changes. Like if it has a bigger screen, it'll show bigger, it'll show more. So it doesn't like scale like the other one. This one just shows more of the level. So if you had a screen that's the size of this whole room, it's just going to show you like a massive level, basically. Then, yeah, you can build stuff that has mobile support, like infinite runners, and so that number 60 is the frames per second, so it's getting 60 frames per second. And on Nexus 5 it's like between 48, like it's close to 60 as well. But if you add too much stuff, it decreases a bit. This is one that I made for a tutorial. Yeah, so the other cool thing that it has is particle systems. So you can do a lot of options for particle systems to have like many little elements for explosions, for like gas emissions, for anything of that sort. And yeah, there's also this virtual pet thing. And this is one that I'm working on at the moment for one of the courses of the Kickstarter campaign. So it's going to be like a Donkey Kong. Doesn't have artwork yet. So for the ones, I know most of you make games, but if somebody's working on like the first game, this is like something that I recommend, that I do myself all the time. Is just do it with rectangles, and then like make something that's because there's so much stuff you have to do. Get artwork, get this, that. If you just want to have like a simple game mechanic, just use rectangles, and then you can change it by sprites and make them animated and add sounds and everything else, all the cool stuff. And this framework is open source. And there's also this game mechanics, Phaser. There's a website that has a lot of cool game mechanics built on Phaser, and you can just grab them. I think you have to give them attribution if you use them, or well, that's really hard with code because it's all just like you could also implement it yourself.
So is this using Phaser?
Yeah, this is all using Phaser. It shows the code in here. It's a Game Mechanical Explorer. But they have. So if you want to do more advanced stuff with like Webgl, Phaser allows to have like shaders and other things, and you can do like the game being distorted and things like that. Yeah, like for example, this is an example of how enemies would see you in a game, like which enemies can see you and which ones can't. And then this is all in the browser. That's all just JavaScript, and it's based on Phaser. And also on Phaser.io, which is a homepage, it has there's a demo section. I think it's an examples or demo. Examples. And so this one has like specific code for each little thing that you might want to do in a game, like render text, how to click on an image and have something happening, for audio, for working with bitmap fonts, or a camera, like a basic follow for the camera.
They put a lot of effort into the presentation, haven't they?
Yeah. This is the third framework that I've really gone into. So the first one was Lime.js, then Quintus, where I was also coding some parts of the framework. But this one, the thing is that it's the ones behind it is a company that used the framework to make games for like Nickelodeon and Disney and things like that. So basically, they're using this in professional projects. So they really want it to be good because they're using it daily, whereas the other ones were more like hobbyists that were doing it. So I think that's one of the reasons, and also because the guy that makes the framework, it's just a small startup from the UK, but he also owns this really important forum of HTML5 game development, where they talk about other frameworks too, and there's like all these different topics. It's like one of the main really hubs for this sort of niche in game development. So he owns that forum too, and therefore like all that community started using it, and since he fixes bugs right away, and like there's now so many people like making it better. So it's a good. I think that's like where you can tell that it's like every time I visit these sites, it's more like there's like new stuff, or it's looking better than before, because it used to be a bit more rough, I suppose. Do you guys want me to show you some code of like what a basic game looks like? Okay. So the one I'm going to show you is this one, which is something really, really basic. It's just a little character and with the camera, and that's it. So the basics of any phaser game is something like this. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can see everything. Basically, it's an empty JavaScript object where you will have an initiation method, then a preloading method where you will preload your fonts, your games, your assets, your images, and then a create method which is fired once the preloading ends. So as soon as all the preloading ends, then create is fired up, and then an update method which is executed multiple times per second, and that's the game loop of this framework. You can obviously have. But you can have more than one state, so you can have this many times. You can do this because imagine that the loading screen might also have its own image. So when did you load the image of the loading screen? Then you need like a previous point where you only loaded one image, so that didn't take that long. I guess you had a black screen for less than you could even see, but you had one image, and then now that you loaded one image, you can have a preloading screen, and that could take more time, and then you have time to load all the other stuff. So you can have many of these states. It's like on a football game, you have the state where everybody comes in, then everybody's watching the game, then everybody leaves, and it's all like phases. And then you just create a phaser. You create a phaser game object, and you will pass it the state, and you will fire the state up. That's the very, very basics of a phaser game. So the game that I was showing you, it would be. In the initiation function, you would set the type of how the screen is going to get scaled, right? So like I'll tell you, there's different options. There's one where the screen keeps an aspect ratio, and then it always fits. I'll have an image to show you those different cases, because I think that's interesting. That's something that it's not just the HTML5 or phaser. It's something that every game developer faces, that targeting mobile. So this would be the options to scale a game. You can either make it exact fit, so it will not get rendered properly. It will just be forced to fit the whole screen. You can have the show all, where the game just keeps its own aspect ratio, no matter what. You could have it no scale, that is just shown if the game is 1,000 by 1,000 and the device has 5,000 pixels, it'll just show small. Or you can do this one called resize, where it'll show more of the level. So it'll show you more of the level. These are the options. So in the initiation, what you do usually is, you define that, and then you will like start initiate the physics system that you want to use in your game. Then there's a whole preloading part where you just preload all of your images, all of your audio, and if you want to show a loading screen, you have to put it there with the loading bar. Phaser has like a method for a loading bar, so it'll show you like how much is left. And then create is when you will create, the background, define some world aspects, add in the player, enable every time you add a sprite, you can like enable physics on the sprite so that the sprite then has gravity, it can collide with other elements, it can move. If it doesn't have physics, it's just like a dead image on the screen, which is what you want to do in some cases. And then on update, usually that's where you take care of two main things. Of collision, you want to be checking it each time so that if two elements are overlapping, then something might happen. And in that part, you also check for user input. So if some key is being pressed, or if the phone is being touched, or if the user is pinching or something, you would usually do it in that part. I guess in other games, you also want to update other sort of things, like the time left. And then you just add your own methods, like to implement jumping and what happens when you hit the floor and that sort of thing. So that's just very simple stuff. Once you like do a tutorial on Phaser, look more into it. So that's one of the things about this framework also is that I think it's the easiest to learn, the ones I've seen, because Lime.js you need to install like Python and run command line tools. Then Quintus has like a very object-oriented structure, which for some people can make it a bit more difficult. And how to get started? You need to make games with HTML5, right? So you need basic to intermediate knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Also some object-oriented notions. A lot of patience. A lot of tolerance to frustration. And I recommend you start with something super simple on the client side. No multiplayer, no RPG with a huge world, ugly graphics, 2D, and then you can build it from there. We have a bunch of tutorials. We have I run this site called Game Dev Academy, so it's mostly interviews to indie developers and tutorials. So there's a whole section on Phaser there. And I've also put some tutorials in this site called HTML5 Hub, which is like a site for people who write about HTML5. So I have a couple of tutorials there. And then our online courses, you can find them in Zenva Academy, which is academy.zenva.com. And we have a free HTML and CSS course, so that's the easiest. Like the starting point would be free in that case. Well, there are some other topics that I want to talk about, but before I dig into it, I just wanted to show you the Kickstarter page, or if you guys want to, because some people ask me over email like if I could sort of talk about that a little bit. So the Kickstarter is on how to it's an online course on Phaser on how to build 15 games. So it's a massive course that is gonna. The first module is how to code in JavaScript, and then all the other modules are different projects on Phaser. Some of the ones that you saw, like the farm animal, the virtual pet, the Donkey Kong game, and then some others. There's going to be an RPG and like a Mario-like game and a match 3 game, and then 2 of the games get voted by the backers of the project. So the gender of 2 out of the 15 games, I don't even know what it's going to be. And then there's one that's a secret game at the end, which, to be honest, I haven't really decided what it's going to be. So yeah, if you wanna help with this project, it's already reached the goal in 11 hours. So now it's now aiming for the highest stretch goal. So if that's reached, I'm gonna add modules on multiplayer and server-side Node.js and Mongo database courses. So it's gonna be like a lot of new stuff. And it's also including now, since it reached the first stretch goal, a Webgl course on Babylon.js that I was showing you. So yeah, this is the link we'll have shown enough. And And there are other topics that I can talk about, but I also would like to hear if you have any questions or if you want me to talk about anything in particular.
Could you go back to your code here
Yeah.
and show where you include the phaser on the actual HTML page?
Yeah.
Please?
Yes. So on a usual game, you have your index.html, and then you can organize the folders however you want. Usually you can do like an assets folder where you have all the images, and then you can have an audio folder, or you can also have JSON files that you're loading, or even from a server as well. And then in JavaScript you can have different files for each game entity if you want to build it that way, or for each state, and of course the phaser library. So the index.html file, it's very simple. You have to include, because we're working with mobile here, there's the viewport meta tag, which is used in mobile games and mobile apps or mobile websites, basically saying that the user cannot pinch to zoom, and that the game shows 100% scale on the phone. So it doesn't show zoomed out. Sometimes on some phones a website be zoomed out. So that's something to include. And then you include the JavaScript file. When you're doing websites, the good practice is to include the script at the end of the body, because then you show the content as fast as you can, whereas the script needs to be loaded. But in this case, because there's no content, it's not a website, you want to show it. It doesn't matter because there's nothing to show. But yeah, you have to include also your own files after including the phaser one. And for the body, you can do this. Also, you can say that the background is black. If you want the background to be black, like in some of the examples I show you, the outside area I think it looks better black than white. You can put it there, black there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So there's the canvas is created by the script, by the phaser script. So I didn't put in a canvas here. So, but you can also create your own canvas and assign it. Yeah, you can also do that.
So you could have a game running in a smaller portion of the page?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can create your own. In this case, I'm not creating it. It'll create one automatically. So let me show you. Like in this case, okay, it shows me that it's using Webgl, it's using Web Audio. And if I inspect, it shows me a canvas, and it's adding a lot of stuff there. But you could add your own canvas and give it your own size and give it an ID. And then when you create the phaser object, you give it the ID of that canvas. So you could have many games in one page if you want. So in this case, I'm sure how he's done it. He must have specified that that's where he wants on this div, or yeah. So I'm not sure if you. I think it does both. Like you can even put in a div and a canvas, or just a div, and it'll create the canvas inside the div. I'm not exactly sure how it does, because I usually just do the game.
If you already have content and it automatically creates it, does that just then obscure all content you have?
No, because you would. I mean, if you have content on the page, you would want to specify where you want your game to be placed. So then you would pick that location, and you would create a div element or a canvas element there.
I was curious if you could use the default content to be some sort of loading screen or something, which then automatically gets replaced by.
You could, because since this is JavaScript, HTML, CSS, you can do basically anything you want. So you could have your own content, and then you could have it on phaser that using say jQuery. Once on this, on this create when the preloading finishes, there's no reason why, if you include jQuery, there's no reason why you could just do a jQuery thing like there. So that's sort of what I was saying before, that this is JavaScript, so you can combine this with basically every other thing that's out there. Example, if you're building an RPG or a game that has a lot of text and UI, maybe phaser has its own way of rendering text, of doing buttons, but maybe you just want to do it with Bootstrap, and so you can also do that. You can just have your UI done on HTML and CSS, and then the game done on Canvas. So that's a valid way of doing it. Some people do work like that. Some people are like, no, it should everything be in the canvas.
You could click to load at any stage, couldn't you? And that will just put it where you want it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It could come later.
Yeah. Any more questions? So I'm going to talk a little bit about these other sort of side topics that I put in here. The main one is the I'm surprised nobody has asked me that, but what are the advantages and disadvantages of using HTML5? Well, I think the main advantage is the fact that it's cross-platform by nature, and that the web is always open, using open technologies, and that, say, you click on a website from 1993 and it still loads on the web browser, but try clicking on a Flash thing, and now it's gone, and you just can't do it anymore. So hopefully you'll be able to double-click on one of these games in 20 years, and maybe it should, I guess, load. There's, well, HTML6 and other things coming out, but that's one of the main advantages, just having all that existing libraries and an existing skill set as well. So you don't have to learn different languages for different platforms. You can work on one code base and export everywhere. Now, the disadvantage, obviously, I was mentioning there's some sort of lacking in hardware. Also, in tools, like compared to, say, Unity. The Intel XDK is the most advanced tool, but it's still being developed. It's not like people are using it, giving feedback. So there's no there's no a level of tools like you would have had like with Flash or that you have with Unity for the WebGL stuff and the 3D stuff. And yeah, and the browser, the hardware support is obviously not. Doesn't necessarily. Sometimes a new version of, say, iOS comes out, and then the games it breaks all the games, and then they have to update it by adding this little code before, things like that. You're exposed to it. And the other disadvantage is, even though you can do it with Cordova, you obviously get like better access to hardware if you're using the actual platform's language. Like if you say the Apple Watch came out, you can just use Swift and Objective-C. I haven't checked. There might be something in Cordova already, probably, but you have to you're like a bit behind in that sense. Then there's another web technology called SVG. So just like we had the whole HTML5 specification and WebGL as like a parallel avenue, but also part of HTML5 as people refer to it. There's also SVG, which is scalable vector graphics support on the browser. Everything we've shown so far, if you zoom in, it's pixels and little squares. Whereas vector images are images created with metadata. So for example, the circle in the canvas is just a bunch of pixels. You zoom in and it's going to be crispy pixels. But you can also define a circle by saying this is a circle, these are the coordinates, this is the length of the radius, and this is the color. And then if you zoom in a circle like that, it's always going to be a circle because it's not defined by a bunch of pixels. So SVG exists on the web. It's also it also has like different degrees of support. So this one's called, it's like an Adobe SVG, Snap SVG, sorry. This open source SVG library is supported by, like sponsored by Adobe, I think, because of their existing tool set. Like you can load stuff that you export from Flash or something like that. But let me show you the kind of things that you can do with it. So this is also like a cutting edge tool in web development that you can also use for websites, for any kind of interactive experiences. So in here you create like shapes, and then you assign, like you change the vertices of those shapes in animations.
This involves a lot of coding, doesn't it? Even with the Snap.
Yeah, but I think I think you can do it. I think the reason why they're supporting this is because it's like a Flash but HTML. So okay. I think you can do the stuff in Flash and then load it in this way. Okay. So I think that's the reasoning behind support.
I think there's various art packages that export to SVG as well. So you might be able to use something like Adobe Illustrator Illustrator.
Yeah.
And make animations and export it, and they just work.
Yeah, exactly. This basically loads SVG, and that's like one sort of thing. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is this. So besides Cordova is an open source project, right? But there's a startup in Silicon Valley that's been working for a couple of years in its own version of Cordova, like its own sort of wrapper, but that's not open source. But some people have reported it has much better performance because it's built in a different way, but it's called Cocoon.js. So this is something a lot of HTML5 game developers are using actually at the moment. Although on every new iPhone or every like newer phones, the support becomes so much better that at one point this might not be necessary or this might be like obsolete. But it's also a way to publish your games on the cloud, to build them on the cloud, and it comes with its own APIs for different things, I think, including ads and other like in-app purchases and things like that. So this is like another option that is been using hardware acceleration before it was supported. So this like the difference between this and Cordova in terms of performance gets closer and closer, the newer the device.
I believe Cordova themselves have said their sort of objective is to sort of write themselves out of existence.
Yeah, in one way with because say the camera geolocation are also you can also make it work in a lot of devices without using Cordova because it becomes like part of the standard. But then the fact that you can write your own custom plugins, I think that's never gonna, because they never know what you will want to build eventually. But yeah, like for many of them, they want to be like non-plugins, just HTML.
It's really cool.
Any more questions on the topic?
I wonder if you've come across any, maybe it's in Phaser, support for like large numbers of tiled images, just to get that like the map type scrollable view.
Yeah.
Is that in their API?
Well, there's this open source tool called Tiled, which I'll open it. I might not have it installed in this computer because it's kind of new, but let's see. No. But there's this program called Tiled. It's open source, it's free, and you can find it at mapeditor.org. Whoops. And this is a generic level editor, not for HTML5, for any framework, where you can create tile-based maps. So it has obviously Unity support and many others.
Have you used that, and how do you put that back into Phaser?
Yeah, I've used it. So Phaser has different like modules as well, as I was mentioning, and one of them is support for tiled. So you can export the files from tiled as XML or as JSON, and then you load it on Phaser and JavaScript, which is one line of code on the asset preloading phase. Okay. And then you render it as a map, and you can see which one of the layers is for collision, right? Because one thing is what we want to show, but then what is actually the floor or the walls. So yeah, I have a little demo on that, which I built in a very, very low resolution. I think the tiles are, and I scaled it up so it looks pretty bad. It's using also an older version of Phaser, so it's this one. So this is something that I built with tiled, and it's like a tea drinker. And the code for that would look like this. I also made a tutorial on how to make that game, so I can send you the link as well.
If that game went on and on and on, and there were like many more images, how would you go about that?
It's definitely, it can be an issue with memory.
Yeah.
One way I guess would be to clear some of them from the memory and load new ones.
Garbage
Yeah.
of elements.
Yeah, it would have to be something like that, because it can get slow. It can get like too crowded if you're loading like a massive. Like I've had that happening, that it's really slow. No, just raster, yeah, just raster. This map editor, though, has objects that you can create. And you can load them in Phaser, but they're not SVG. But I guess, yeah, combining SVG, I don't think you can combine SVG on the canvas.
Just wondered if, Pablo, if you had any thoughts about the audio side of HTML5, anything you've experienced that's quirky?
On what, sorry?
On the audio side of it?
On the
audio.
Oh, audio side. Yeah. So especially on the Android stock browser, because now like newer Android phones use Chrome and it works a lot better than on the older ones, and that includes also when you're using like a Webgl on like an older phone. Sometimes you can't play two sounds at the same time, so that's a bit annoying. And sometimes like the sounds don't play right away. Those are two things that I've experienced. And the other thing with sound that is a bit annoying is that you have to, if you want it to work on both iOS and Android, you need to have it in different file formats. So you have the file twice basically, but like an MP3 and an OGG file, because it's like they don't play all the formats. That's the same when you use it on the web. So it's a little bit annoying. Yeah. A lot of people say that audio is like one of the weaknesses of HTML5. And on some, especially on like older phones or like even newer phones, but like low end. Yeah, so for that tile map game, you just load the tile in the preloading part, right? So in this case, it's a JSON file that I exported from this map editor. So I have this map editor, I made the map there, and there's two files. There's the file that I export, and then there's the file with all the tiles, the image. So that one is this one. It's game tiles. So that's just an image. Okay. And then when you initiate your game, then you just say that you're adding that you're adding a tile map, and that these are the tiles, the images of the map. And then you create just like a background layer which doesn't have collision, and then I call it block layer, which has the collision of the walls. And then you just set you specify like the range for the collision. That's like it's more specific. Like that doesn't make much sense, but yeah. So it's done in only a few lines. It's done in only a few lines, and then there are ways to load these elements that you created. If you created like, for example, because you can use it to make the map, but you can also put an enemy, and you can enter like data for that enemy. You can like enter energy and like some other stuff. So you can also grab that from Phaser. So you could use it to actually make the whole level. If you make like the code how to read that, then you can just use like once you're done with the code, you can just use it and create 100 levels with the editor.
Are you working mainly in the text editor?
It's both. I mean, you're in games you're doing everything, but for content, I guess in a game like this, I guess if you're doing many levels, most of the time you'll spend it on the editor, on the map editor, right? But yeah, for simple games, it's just coding, mostly coding.
Where do you put your coordinates and whatnot, and how do you get them into the code? Like,
so in this example,
for your collisions and whatnot, yeah.
In this example, well, when you're creating the sprites, you give them a position, X and Y. And if you're using like a map editor, then it will grab those from the map editor because you create it visually. But most of the time, you're not using the map editor. You're just doing, like a game, like the farming game, it's all just manually placed. Like these sprites go here.
Manually, and then
as in the JavaScript code, like you would enter like coordinates X and Y. Yeah.
So if you want to move stuff, do you have a way to move it on the screen like a WYSIWYG editor? Yeah,
if you want to move stuff, if you're just doing it in the code, there's something called that you can do twins, so that you can like set an initial position and a final position, and you say and how much time that will change. So you say start here and here, and I guess if you wanted to do like a path, you'd have to enter like the different points of that path. But I think it does support. I think there are tools to generate those paths. I've seen it on the forums, but I just haven't used it.
You mainly do it manually?
Yeah, just do it manually. Yeah.
I just thought the other way would be in the dev tools of the Chrome, but that canvas isn't elements, is it? So you can't find like the X and the top and the left of the move stuff about.
Yeah, you have to do it like manually. Yeah. You just refresh and see if you want it more to the left, more to the right.
I think all you see is the canvas element. You don't see anything underneath that.
Oh, okay.
So like if you're building like all the components.
But what you could do, what you could do is you could do it so that if you're hovering the mouse anywhere in the game on your update method, you can make it to print on the console the current position of the mouse. So you could do it manually. And like I don't know if you saw in one of the games that I showed, it had like a lot of information on the screen.
Yeah.
I think you might be able to see it there as well. Not sure. Yeah. But if not, it should be very easy to implement because it's just a mouse, or even, it's just like a mouse over effect, sort of, mouse over effect, and it shows.
Probably, not too difficult to make your own sort of editing mode.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So where you can maybe drag things around on the canvas or something to position them.
Yeah, you could, yeah. Yeah, so just like you have initialization, preloading, then starting the game, then the updates of the game, there's also one to show stuff on top of everything else. That's what you use for debugging. So you can have like your own stats and your own updates. And these are all events of the game that you can hook into. More questions? No? All good?
Thanks, Pablo.
Thank you, guys. Cheers.
Do you reckon I could add a game just on the screen that